I asked you all on Instagram for your hot takes about the future of church. You flooded my inbox with replies, and so today I'm going to be reacting and giving you my thoughts on your hot takes. If you enjoy this style of content, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and if you're new, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, first up, and I'm blurring the names here just because the folks that submitted these to the inbox didn't post them publicly. For the American church to thrive, we need to invest in the next generations more than ever before. Yeah, I mean, I'll drop the American qualifier here, but let's look at some numbers on this. Ryan Burge is one of my favorite data sources. Great follow on X as well. His header there just says graphs about religion, and here is one of those graphs. What you're looking at is a breakdown by generation of those who claim no religious affiliation. And two things to point out. Clearly, with each generation in America, we're seeing a greater percentage of people with no religious affiliation. Moreover, as time passes, generations on their own are becoming less religious. So for example, in 2016, 38% of millennials had no religious affiliation. In 2022, that number rose to 44%. Similarly, Gen Z was at 39% no religious affiliation in 2016. In 2022, that number rose to 48%. To quote Ryan Burge last year, it seems statistically justifiable to say that by the time the United States has another presidential election, half of Gen Z will identify as atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And if you're curious how this data was compiled or just want to go deeper, we'll have it linked in the description. But here's the bottom line. Gen Z is the least religious generation in American history, and they are becoming less religiously identified as each year passes. Combine that with the fact that every day thousands of members of the silent and boomer generations are dying off, making it not at all hyperbole to say that the landscape of faith and religion in America, and by extension, a lot of the Western world, I'm a Canadian for context, is changing rapidly, and the consequences of that will likely be profound and as of yet not fully known or predictable. Which gets me back to the original hot take from this person. We need to invest in the next generations more than ever before. You know, perhaps you balked at that and thought to yourself, yeah, we say that every generation though, this time it's no different. Except, maybe this time it is different. And this brings up the challenging question that every one of our churches has to face, especially if, like most churches, your congregation is aging. What changes are you willing to make to reach the next generation, knowing that those changes will likely be uncomfortable and not preferred by the older generation, the people that actually go to and support your church right now? Like, it's not an easy proposition. Hey, we know that, this is how you like things, how we've always done them, church, but to reach a group of people that has never shown any interest in us, we're going to abandon everything you like in hopes of reaching them. But what's the alternative, right? Like, we saw the trends on the graph, and I'm not trying to just be all doom and gloom here, but rather soberly acknowledge the reality that so many of our churches are facing right now. Which leads me to the next hot take. We are going to become numerically smaller, but theologically and communally deeper. And this is the positive read on the current state of things, if you want to call it that. And I'm happy to add my perspective as a non-American here, because my experience in my own country of Canada is that I did not grow up with cultural Christianity, at least not to the same extent that my American neighbors did. Our churches in Canada are much smaller relative to our American counterparts. If you go to church, it's because you really want to go to church for the most part. And so the glimmer of hope that I can offer all of us is that there is great value in knowing that the people that do attend and serve in our churches are not simply doing it because it's what you do in the culture, but because it truly matters to them and they want to be a part of it. Next hot take. The most well-attended and popular churches are not going to have fancy production. Yeah, so I've got to disagree with this one. I just don't see it. Why? Well, because I'm bullish on human nature. We love spectacle. Sports stadiums, they're only getting bigger and with higher production. Live concert venues like the Sphere are trailblazing new examples of greater tech and greater production value. And I think in the history of the Christian faith, there's no shortage of things that we can point to where a group of Christian leaders wanted to make a big deal about God, and the way they did that was with spectacle and scale. And so I don't think it's a uniquely American thing either. The other reason I don't see this happening is because the bigger a church is, the easier it is to be a spectator, right? It's easier to draw a crowd because you're asking less of the person attending. And because the crowd is big, the person attending has less required of them. It's just definitional. The smaller a church is, the harder it is to slip in and out unnoticed. It's more intimate and thus more relationally demanding. What I'm saying is, by virtue of its size, it's not easy for large churches to be as relational. You just can't easily do real community with that many people in one place. So what's the substitute? production, spectacle. They just go hand in hand. So you could say that we won't see as many big, popular, well-attended churches. Maybe they're gone altogether. But so long as those churches exist, I think they will have the fancy production that so many of us crave. Next up, until there is another revival, young pastors will be a huge commodity due to scarcity. Yeah, so this is interesting. I'm skeptical of this just because of the reality of supply and demand. The 2020 Faith Communities Today survey, which is one of the largest national surveys of congregations ever done in the States, found an increase in the average age of pastors, climbing from age 50 in 2000 to 57 in 2020. Additionally, those who attend religious services are twice as likely as the average American to be 65 and older. So what does that all mean? Well, most pastors are older, yes, but if you're older, you're also a lot more likely to go to church, meaning if you're a younger pastor, you would be a relatively rare commodity. The supply is low there, but is the demand high? Not if we look at that graph from earlier. The supply of younger pastors is low, but the demand looks equally low in the same generations for people attending church. Next hot take, and we got a lot like this one. Bi-vocational pastors will become the norm and the majority. Once the boomers die, giving will decrease, leading to more pastors working secular jobs. The need for more senior level pastors will no longer exist. All ministers should be trained to be bivocational. Yeah, so this tracks. To get a baseline for where things are today, the previously mentioned Faith Communities Today survey reported that among all leaders, 3/4 are full-time and the remaining quarter are part-time. So to get to where bivocational is the majority, we'd have to roughly double the number of part-time pastors right now, which over the next quarter century or so seems very reasonable. Now you might be watching and think, quarter century? Yeah, it won't take that long, give it 10 years. And interestingly, a lot of the hot takes that got sent in used that kind of timeline. Oh, in a decade, things will be like this. And I just don't see change moving that fast, which, is ironic, right? Biggest communication shift in 500 years. Things are moving at a rapid pace. That's what I always say. And it's true. What I've also found, though, is that we tend to overestimate how fast things will fully flip. That isn't to say we can't see it on the horizon. We can clearly discern where the trend is heading, but for the reality to actually be fully cemented seems to always take a bit longer than we tend to predict. Next hot take, and we got a ton just like this one also. Return to Orthodox theology and traditions. Not fully Orthodox maybe, but blended with modern. The trend in church will go more traditional and feel less produced. It will look a lot like the historical church. Simplicity will replace the overproduction of Sunday services. We will see more liturgy. So something that really interests me when thinking about the future of church is the experience of those serving in church and where that does or does not intersect with the preferences of the people in the pews. Because when I read these hot takes about the future of church, and by no means is what I'm about to say meant to discount those perspectives, it sounds like weary church staff that are being overworked and have just had enough with the big productions and what it requires of them. And their reaction is to pine for a different era of church that is slower and more deliberate and purposely simple. Now, you might think I'm reading into this too much, into what these folks are saying, and that very well might be the case. What I'm interested in, though, is this perspective shared by the congregations of these churches? Or is it not? And I don't know the answer, but I do think it's possible that many of the people in these churches enjoy the big production and spectator experience and programming for their kids, even while the people working behind the scenes are under too much pressure, with demands that are too great, expectations that are too high, pay that is too low. And what that means is the solution may not be to swing to the other side of the pendulum, but rather to find more sustainable ways of pursuing the same kind of model. Perhaps the crux of it, though, is that that's not possible, which is the point that these people are making, right? Alternatively, what we could be seeing is a broader realization among both staff and church attendees that this attractional, high production model really just doesn't work, save for a small handful of churches with affluent and charismatic personalities driving them. And then for the rest of us, leaning into the historical rhythms of church centered around liturgy and the table and the church calendar is what has always made sense and is something we should get back to. Let's close with this final hot take about the future. It'll be fine. Amen, right? Through every cultural change and upheaval around the world, the church endures. Thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. Make sure to give me a follow on Instagram @Brady Shearer so you can participate in future Q&As like this one, and I'll talk to you real soon.